And welcome once again to Flashpoints. I'm Bob Orr. Joining me as he always does is Juan Zarate. He's our national security analyst. Juan, good to see you.
Bob, great seeing you.
So oil is dropping like a rock. We see the price below $50, below $49. What does this mean? I mean, I know it's not great for oil investors. It's been a real bear for the market. Yeah. But what's it mean beyond that?
Well, it's affecting the economy and the markets. Clearly, we're seeing that. But geopolitically, it's shifting the tectonics that we've grown accustomed to. In some ways, it's putting at risk and putting stress on the oil autocracies. You see the pressure on the Russian economy and what that's doing to not only slow their economy, but to really cripple their ability to fund their government and their aspirations. That's added to by the sanctions and the other efforts internationally to isolate Russia. You see the Iranians complaining because Iran obviously depends on high value of oil for its budget, and that in concert with existing sanctions is really hurting. Venezuela, which depends mightily on the price of oil, is hurting. Massive mismanagement of the economy by that government. Maduro has been a disaster, of course, but really constricting their ability to be flexible internally and externally.
That sounds like, if you're the United States, that's not all bad.
That's not all bad because it adds sort of general market pressure to these hotspots and to these situations where, in some ways, we want to continue to pressure the Russian economy to affect what Vladimir Putin does. We want it to affect what the mullahs are thinking in Tehran as we negotiate around the nuclear program.
What does the U.S. need to do? Because also the United States is a big oil producer now.
Right. Well, in the first instance, I think we haven't fully come to grips with what is the strategic implication of all of this. I think 2014 began to emerge this with the debate about whether or not we could displace, for example, European dependence on Russian oil and gas as a way to counter Russian influence. And so you've begun to see a policy debate in Washington, which I think is important, about thinking about oil as a strategic tool, in particular when the U.S. is such an important now source of oil and gas and is soon to become the leading producer of oil around the world. What does that mean for our ability to actually use oil and gas as a tool of statecraft, the way that other countries have in the past?
And as we wrap up, just as an example, that there's not a cohesive thought on this, the president is still against the Keystone Pipeline.
Yeah. The
Republicans are clamoring for that. How does that play into this?
Well, that plays in all sorts of different ways, right? You've got the debate about, how many jobs does this create? But geopolitically, I think it's a question of how are we working with Canada to develop their oil supplies? How does that oil, the oil sands that would be coming through that pipeline and then being distributed out of American ports and facilities, how does that add to the supply in the market? And actually, how does that then provide some more flexibility for the U.S. In its relationships, not just economically, but geopolitically? And I think this is all part of a changing landscape that we really haven't come to grips with yet. But now you've got the strategists really thinking about how does this changing landscape affect American power.
Part of the issue is interesting. The U.S. was never going to be an oil-producing power.
Right.
This is surprising.
And we lived through the 70s and 80s where the U.S. has always been dependent, always been an importer, always been subject to the whims of a lot of these regimes that control these supplies. Now the tables are turning a bit, and the question is, what does that mean for U.S. power influence in geopolitics? That will be something to watch in 2015.
Very interesting. Juan, thanks.
Thank you, Bob.
And thanks to you for watching Flashpoints. I'm Bob Orr. We'll see you next time.